Emily Turner was the picture of suburban perfection, a Canadian wife whose elegant home and successful husband painted the image of a life most would envy. Arjun Sharma was an Indian immigrant chasing dreams of stability, working long hours and yearning for something more. When their worlds collided, passion ignited into a secret affair that neither of them could resist. But what began as desire soon spiraled into obsession, lies, and betrayal. By the time the truth surfaced, one life had been lost, and another condemned forever. This is the chilling story of how love turned lethal. In the quiet suburbs of Toronto, Emily Turner lived a life that many would envy. Her home stood on a peaceful street lined with maple trees, the kind of neighborhood where everyone waved politely and lawns were neatly trimmed. She had been married to Daniel for almost 12 years, and together they had built a life of stability and comfort. Daniel was a financial advisor, respected in his field and admired for his discipline and dedication. Emily, meanwhile, managed a small interior design business, giving her the flexibility to balance work with her social life. To anyone looking in from the outside, the Turners seemed to embody success and happiness. Yet beneath the surface, Emily's days felt increasingly hollow. Her routines were predictable, her evenings repetitive, and her marriage had settled into a pattern of quiet companionship rather than passion. Daniel's long hours at the office left her alone for much of the day. And though she appreciated the material comfort his job provided, she could not shake the sense that something was missing. The thrill of early love had long faded, replaced by schedules, obligations, and silence. Emily often found herself staring at the walls of her perfectly decorated home, wondering if this was all her life would ever be. Her friends admired her polished image, but Emily's smiles at social gatherings often masked her restlessness. She envied younger women who spoke about dreams, risks, and adventures, while she felt trapped in a cage of her own making. Her husband's world was numbers and strategy, grounded in logic and security. Emily, however, longed for something unpredictable, something that would stir emotions she thought she had lost. She tried to ignore these feelings, convincing herself that they were fleeting, but the emptiness continued to grow. It was during this time of quiet dissatisfaction that Emily's path crossed with Arjun, a young man who had recently immigrated from India. He worked long shifts at a small cafe near her office, and their first encounters were nothing more than polite exchanges over coffee. But there was something about him that caught her attention. Perhaps it was the way he spoke with sincerity, or the spark of ambition in his eyes. Unlike the people in her social circle, Arjun carried stories of struggle and perseverance. He spoke with a raw honesty that intrigued her, a kind of authenticity that her comfortable life had long lacked. The more often she visited the cafe, the more she found herself lingering. What began as casual pleasantries grew into longer conversations about work, culture, and dreams. Emily felt a sense of energy whenever she was around him, as though she were rediscovering a side of herself that had been dormant for years. His presence disrupted the monotony of her routine, igniting feelings she hadn't experienced since her youth. She knew the attraction was dangerous, but the allure of something forbidden gave it even more power. For the first time in years, Emily felt alive. She didn't realize that this newfound spark would set into motion a chain of events that would shatter her carefully constructed world and drag her into a darkness she could never have imagined. What began as a harmless exchange of smiles and conversations soon transformed into something far more consuming. Emily found herself making excuses to visit the cafe where Arjun worked. Lingering over cups of coffee she hardly touched, just to extend their time together. She told herself it was innocent, that she only enjoyed his company. But beneath the surface, she knew she was drifting toward dangerous territory. Arjun seemed equally drawn to her, fascinated by her elegance and the life she described. He admired her confidence, her taste, and the way she carried herself with an air of refinement he had only observed from afar. Their worlds could not have been more different, yet that difference only pulled them closer. Emily began to invent reasons for her late nights. She would tell Daniel she had client meetings or networking events, while in reality she was slipping away to secret places with Arjun. At first, her encounters were cautious and filled with nervous energy, but soon they gave in to the thrill of secrecy. The hotel rooms became their sanctuary, where Emily shed the image of a polished suburban wife and embraced a passion she had buried for years. For Arjun, these moments felt like proof that he was finally being seen and valued. not just as another immigrant struggling to find his place, but as a man worthy of love and desire. The intensity of their connection deepened quickly. Arjun began to open up about his past, sharing stories of the sacrifices he had made to come to Canada, the pressure from his family back home, and his longing for stability. Emily listened with a mixture of admiration and guilt. She felt both protective and exhilarated, as though she were part of something secret and extraordinary. Or to her, Arjun represented escapan, untamed world far removed from the neat lines of her marriage and suburban existence. She convinced herself that what they shared was more than lust, that it was fate leading her into a love story she had been denied. But as their affair grew more passionate, it also became more complicated. Emily had to juggle her double life with increasing skill, crafting lies that weighed heavily on her conscience. The guilt would sometimes gnaw at her, especially when she looked at Daniel across the dinner table and saw the trust in his eyes. Yet the pull of her secret was too strong to resist. Arjun, meanwhile, began to envision a future that went beyond hidden meetings. He wanted more time, more commitment, and more certainty. He started to believe that Emily would leave her husband and choose him, a thought that both thrilled and unsettled her. The secrecy added fuel to their fire, but it also laid the groundwork for cracks to appear. Emily was intoxicated by the danger, the risk of being caught, the thrill of living two lives at once. She told herself she was in control, that she could balance both worlds without consequence. What she failed to see was that the closer she grew to Arjun, the more impossible that balance would become. The affair that began as an escape was slowly transforming into a trap, one that would pull them both into consequences far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. Emily's double life began to unravel in ways she hadn't anticipated. At first, she had believed she could carefully manage the lies, maintaining the image of a devoted wife while secretly feeding her hunger for excitement. But the cracks soon appeared. Daniel was no fool. Though he never accused her directly, his sharp eyes caught the subtle changes. He noticed the faint perfume on her clothes when she returned late at night, the distracted way she stared at her phone, and the sudden distance in her affection. He didn't confront her, but his quiet suspicion created a tension in the household that grew heavier with each passing day. Emily could sense his unease and knew it was only a matter of time before her world collided. At the same time, Arjun's demeanor began to shift. In the beginning, he had been content with stolen moments and whispered promises, but as weeks turned into months, his desire for permanence grew stronger. He wanted more than secrecy. He wanted legitimacy. He imagined a life with Emily, one where they lived openly and built a future together. His vision, however, was far removed from Emily's reality. She had no intention of destroying her marriage or sacrificing the comforts of her life. What for her was a dangerous escape, for Arjun had become an all-consuming dream. When Emily tried to create distance, Arjun's reaction unsettled her. He grew impatient, demanding more of her time and more certainty about their future. He began questioning her excuses, pressing her for answers she wasn't prepared to give. His texts and calls multiplied, flooding her phone at all hours. What had once felt thrilling now started to feel suffocating. Emily was torn between guilt, fear, and temptation, unsure how to navigate the tangled web she had spun. Her anxiety deepened when Daniel's suspicions became harder to ignore. He grew quieter at home, watching her with an intensity that unsettled her. She began to worry that her carefully crafted facade would collapse, exposing her affair and ruining her reputation. The walls of her double life were closing in, and she felt trapped. She tried to reassure Arjun, promising him time and patience, but these gestures only fueled his obsession. He clung more tightly, convinced that Emily was slipping away. The dynamic between them shifted from passionate to volatile. Frustrations erupted in anger when Emily canceled plans or made excuses. He accused her of playing with his emotions, of using him for thrills without ever intending to choose him. Emily, frightened by his intensity, tried to retreat, but each step back only provoked him further. She began to realize that what once felt like freedom had now become a chain, binding her to someone whose love had transformed into obsession. As the tension mounted, Emily felt the first stirrings of dread. The excitement that had once made her feel alive now filled her with fear. She knew that if she didn't take control soon, the situation would spiral beyond her ability to manage. What she failed to recognize was that it already had. The fragile balance she thought she could maintain was shattered, and both of her lives, her marriage and her secret affair, were on a collision course that would end in devastating consequences. The night Emily decided to meet Arjun for the last time was one filled with dread and uncertainty. Rain fell heavily over the city, the streets glistening under the dim glow of streetlights, as if nature itself was warning her of the storm that awaited. She had rehearsed her words countless times, planning to end things gently, to explain that their affair could no longer continue. She wanted to preserve her marriage, to silence Daniel's suspicions before they grew into accusations, and to pull her life back from the edge of collapse. Yet deep down, she knew Arjun would not let her go easily. They met in a small rented apartment that had once been their refuge, a place where passion had flourished in secrecy. But on this night, the air was thick with unease rather than excitement. Arjun sensed the change before Emily even spoke. Her eyes no longer carried the same spark, her posture stiff and hesitant. When she told him she couldn't see him anymore, his entire world cracked. To Arjun, Emily was not just a lover. She was his future, his hope, the reason he had endured loneliness and hardship. Hearing her speak of an ending felt like betrayal, as though she had stolen from him the life he dreamed of. What began as desperate pleas soon turned into heated confrontation. Arjun's voice rose, his frustration spilling over into accusations. He demanded answers, pressing her to confess whether she had ever truly loved him, or if he had only been a distraction from her comfortable life. Emily tried to calm him, insisting that she had cared for him, but could not sacrifice everything she had built. Her words, intended to soften the blow, only pierced deeper. To Arjun, they confirmed his worst fear, that she had used him, discarded him, and planned to retreat into the safety of her privileged world while leaving him broken. The tension escalated rapidly, the storm outside echoing the storm inside. Objects were knocked over in the chaos of their confrontation, shadows flickering against the walls as emotions spiraled out of control. In a moment of unrestrained rage, Arjun lashed out. His anger overwhelmed his reason, and his actions crossed a line that could never be undone. By the time the room fell silent again, Emily lay motionless, her life extinguished in a violent instant. The gravity of what had just occurred crashed down on him with unbearable weight. Panic overtook him as he stared at the lifeless body. He paced the room, hands trembling, trying to piece together what to do next. He attempted to wipe away evidence, to rearrange the scene in hopes of masking his involvement. But his every move was clumsy, leaving behind traces that would later betray him. The once secret world they had built was now a crime scene, drenched not in passion but in irreversible tragedy. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing over the city as though to cleanse it of the darkness that had unfolded. Inside the apartment, however, the silence was heavy, final, and damning. What had begun as a dangerous love affair had reached its inevitable breaking point, and Arjun, gripped by fear and regret, realized his life had been destroyed in the very moment he sought to claim it. Emily's sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through her quiet suburban community. When she failed to return home that night, Daniel's unease grew into alarm. At first, he told himself she might have been delayed by work or staying with a friend, but by morning, the truth was undeniable. He contacted the authorities, and soon a search began. Her car was still parked outside her office, her phone rang unanswered, and her credit cards showed no unusual activity after the evening she vanished. For neighbors and friends who had always seen her as reliable and composed, the mystery was unthinkable. Investigators immediately began piecing together her final hours. Daniel's grief was compounded by the slow revelation of secrets he had long suspected but never confronted. Phone records revealed frequent calls and messages to a number he did not recognize. Surveillance cameras placed her near a small apartment in the city on the night she disappeared. As detectives followed the trail, the image of Emily as a perfect wife and businesswoman began to fracture. Her hidden relationship with Arjun emerged in fragments, painting a picture of a double life that few could have imagined. Arjun tried to maintain his composure when questioned, insisting he had no knowledge of Emily's whereabouts. But his nervousness betrayed him. Detectives noted inconsistencies in his story, the contradictions in his timeline, and the unease in his behavior. When forensic teams searched the apartment he had rented, their suspicions solidified. traces of blood hastily cleaned but still detectable, told the story of a violent struggle. Fibers from Emily's clothing were discovered, along with her jewelry tucked away in a drawer. What Arjun had believed were desperate attempts to erase his crime had only left behind a trail that tied him irrefutably to her death. As the investigation unfolded in court, the story captured public attention. Media outlets portrayed it as a tale of obsession, betrayal, and tragedy. Headlines painted Emily as a woman torn between comfort and passion, while Arjun was depicted as the immigrant dreamer whose longing for love spiraled into violence. The prosecution presented a chilling narrative of how an affair, once intoxicating, devolved into possessiveness and rage. They argued that Arjun's inability to let go had driven him to commit murder, leaving behind a trail of evidence too overwhelming to dismiss. Daniel, sitting silently through the proceedings, was left to confront a reality that shattered him. His wife, the woman he thought he knew, had lived a secret life that ended in brutality. The betrayal of her affair was painful enough, but the finality of her death, and the violent way it had occurred, cut deeper than anything he could have imagined. His grief was compounded by the knowledge that her choices had not only destroyed her life, but had also unraveled his own. The verdict was decisive. Arjun was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for decades. For the community, the case served as a chilling reminder of how quickly hidden passions can spiral into irreversible consequences. For Daniel, it was the end of a life he had once believed was stable and secure, replaced instead by silence, grief, and questions that would never have answers. Emily's secret had destroyed them all, leaving behind a haunting story that echoed far beyond the courtroom.